we were talking just before we press record around this concept of networking and how sometimes people don't tap into or build a network or nurture a network until they're forced to do it.
Yes.
So I'd love, because I want to get into some conversations around all of this, but can you just let us know what was the catalyst? Was there an event or was there something that happened that said to you, it's time to write another book
Hmm.
and I need to write a book about this topic, that is mastering networking, right?
Yeah. Well, look, as usual, as with the first book, it's not one thing. It's perhaps a number of things that kind of triggered me into writing about it. And one of them, honestly, was a podcast that I got invited on whilst I was promoting the first book. And what was interesting about this podcast was it wasn't a sales focused one. You know,
Mhm.
90% of the ones I've been doing, you know, when I was out there with the cultural sales leader, have been genuinely sales focused podcasts,
Yeah.
global in nature and what have you. But this one was more of a premise of career changing. And so the topic was really, you know, how did you go from corporate to writing books, essentially?
Yeah.
And one of the questions that I was asked was, you know, what advice would you have for someone who's not confident with self promotion?
Mm.
And that got me thinking, right? And then around that time, I was also witnessing because you know, especially here in Singapore, we still have had what some people are calling the Great Hesitation, which is to say that companies are starting to hire again now, but for a long period were cost cutting. So
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of people in my network who suddenly were finding themselves redundant and suddenly turning to, well, what do I do here? And
Mm.
going through that horrible process of LinkedIn job applications, where essentially, you know, you only have to go on LinkedIn and see some of these posts, which are some of the most interactive with posts on there, where people are sort of saying the same story. You know, I've done 100 applications, I've got, you know, maybe 70% automatic rejections. I've got 2 interviews, you know, and I've been ghosted. You know,
Yeah.
that's the usual sort of experience. And you know, I was kind of reflecting as also on my past career. You know, I we were talking earlier. I've been made redundant myself 5 times in my career, but I've also created the jobs that I eventually got into that were posted
Hmm.
publicly myself 5 times as well. And I've
Yeah.
done that through networking. Now, anecdotally, as I say, this isn't a real statistic, but in talking to other recruiters and you know also having that experience of my own, only about 20% of you know publicized roles on LinkedIn are genuinely open, which is to
Hmm.
say without an internal candidate or an external candidate who's already been identified
Yeah.
in some way, shape, or form. And of course, that person has more access to the hiring panel, can have a better sense of what the challenges are and what their value is, and can articulate that in a much better way than someone coming in from outside. Someone
Yeah.
coming in from outside has to be truly exceptional to upset that. And so it got me to thinking, you know, networking is a skill that I think everybody needs to have in professional life. It's not just about those times of crisis, you know, when you do need to find whatever it is, a new gig or whatever. It is about, you know, being recognized for what you do, being
Mm.
valued for what you do. And it's also about building customer bases and retaining and finding new customers. So it's a whole topic unto itself. But I really wrote this book from the perspective of mastering networking so that you might create the job opportunities that you deserve.
Mm.
And that's not just when you absolutely need to in times of crisis, but it's also, you know, looking back through my career, you know, as I'm sure with most people, when did you get your biggest rises or biggest promotions? It's generally from leaving one company to go to another, right? And in large part, again, networking gets you to your goals faster than if you
Mm.
were to try and just sit there online getting rejected constantly left, right and center, right? um, so it's really about all of that, and it's also to, you know, in the context of hiring, It's to try to help people understand why the recruitment industry has changed so fundamentally. Why is it that the candidate experience is so horrible? There are dynamics behind all of this, and a lot of people don't understand how that industry sources and finds candidates. So you also have to be prepared to know that you've got to have certain keywords in place and just do some basics,
Yeah.
which again, I don't think a lot of people think about, because they think recruitment is a people industry. It is, but the one-to-one relationship with the recruiter that we used to have maybe 10 years ago doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah.
So it's for all of those reasons.